To look at the right hand engine mounting situation, and here I've got a selection of two different ones that I happen to have. One is a Ford Capri Escort style one, and this one is a Land Rover one. They are pretty similar, albeit the Land Rover one is thinner with a strange extra middle plate which I don't fully understand. Don't know which one will work best at the moment, but I'm slightly inclined to think it's the Land Rover one, simply because it looks like it might go in more easily. And what's going to happen here is it's going to be bolted, or there's going to be a hole through this plate, and it's going to be bolted to the back or top of that plate. And then there's going to be a kind of arm coming off the other plate, which is on the back of on the side of the engine in here, and it will sit on top. So what I need now is simply two flat plates, each of which is large enough to accept the round surface of the engine mounting. So these big plates I've got here are too big, to be honest. Although having said that, the lower one does need to be probably, well, it's certainly welded to the chassis, so it will need to be, one will be wider than the other. So I need to drill two holes. So, off camera, I have made a piece of metal with a M10 threaded hole. I'm probably going to use these Land Rover engine mountings, and that should weld on there quite nicely. Whether it's a bit over there or a bit over here, we'll find out. But that looks to be pretty straightforward. So I just need a matching plate to go on the top side.
I'll make some tea.
And some tea seems to be ready, so that's good. I just have to make a matching, it can be square, the top one, but a matching plate to go on the top side. And I think I might have that with a nut rather than a threaded hole. The reason for having a threaded hole there is simply because it might be a bit tricky to get at the other side of it, but top side should be fine. So yeah, I need it'll probably end up being square, maybe a bit octagonal. So here I've got my second metal plate, one of which is the threaded one. So we have a possibility of a plate connected to another plate which is welded on the chassis, and this plate here will have, as it were, an arm going straight across to the metal plate on the side of the engine, and that will be engine mounting number one. Superb. And while I'm at it, I thought I'd do another plate for the other side, even though I'm nowhere near ready for it. So I've almost completed this engine mounting. Just move this up out of the way. So the base plate is well, just resting there. Actually, previously it was clamped in with a G-clamp. Then we have the top plate, and what I've made off camera is this arm, which goes up to the plate that was already bolted to the engine, and I've cut this piece of square tube and tacked it onto the plate, and in a moment I shall fully weld it on, and then that should be good to take the weight of the engine. Obviously this base plate needs to be welded to the chassis as well, but temporarily, actually, just for holding the weight of the engine, I think that will probably be good enough to hold it up, which means I can do away with some of these chains and cranes and things. So that's the next stage, a bit of extra welding. So I have now fully welded on the back edge of that square arm onto the plate which is mounted on the side of the engine. I haven't welded this point or that point at the moment because I think it will just sit there. I might finish up ending up putting a spacer in there or something, so hedging my bets slightly, I've left those unwelded, but I think that shouldn't make any difference actually. So what I'm going to do now, since the thing is indeed fitted to the side of the engine, this chain is slack, so I could remove it. Well, it's a bit of a fiddle to do on camera because the chain goes under the engine, but let's see what happens when I release the engine crane. Hopefully not. Well, there we are. Didn't move a heck of a lot, and nor should it. Not sure whether any extra reinforcing I could possibly put a gusset underneath that join where the weld is. Just a bit of belt and braces, but effectively that's the first engine mounting made. Yep, quite pleased. So I'm now moving on to the other engine mounting, and here we can see the if you like, remains of the original Jaguar engine mounting, which incorporates a connection for the oil cooler and oil filter, which is towards the back of the engine, and was rather unsuitable, shall we say, but fortunately what it does offer is the ability to be modified. So I'm just taking off the original engine mounting here. It's held on by three bolts. Now the section that originally held the oil filter has already been cut off, and that exposes, as we shall see in a minute, two holes, galleries, which originally went to the oil filter, but fortunately those holes do lend themselves to being tapped, threaded, and having a connector put onto, so that remote hoses can be used, and a remote oil filter and or oil cooler can be used. So by using this rather odd oil filter, God, my hand's getting tired, this rather odd oil filter stroke engine mounting, originally used by Jaguar, there does seem to be a way of doing this. I guess what that points towards is the fact that the AJ30 engine, Jaguar engine, is actually made by Ford and was based on the Duratec V6 engine as used in the Ford Mondeo, where of course it's used in a transverse alignment, and therefore they needed to find, if you like, a engine mounting for use in the Jaguar, which they hadn't really previously thought of. So, get you here. So here is that engine mounting, which has already been modified to some extent. It's fitted on. This is the bit that's exposed to the outside world. The two bolts, left and right, and the centre one is one of these banjo oil filter type connections, which goes straight through and feeds these two galleries, which is where I hope to connect threaded connections and then have a remote oil filter. But all of this, of course, is in order to achieve an engine mounting which is attached to this piece of metal using its own mounting bolts and the big flat surface on top. So I need to devise something to do that. So here it is, my right hand side engine mounting. I've used the original oil filter takeoff style mounting and basically bolted a metal plate, steel plate, to that, using the original bolt holes down here, which go right through. A couple of new ones, here another one. That's a 6mm steel plate, and then welded this box section similar to the other one on the other side, welded that to it, and here is my two kind of sandwich plates with the Land Rover rubber in between. Now it is a very tight fit at the moment, probably a bit too tight, but actually so far this plate here is not actually welded to the chassis, nor is it on the other side. So there is a jiggling room and the possibility of packing it up and so on to raise that height. So hopefully I shall get to a position where I can finalise that, and eventually we'll weld this lower plate onto the chassis on both sides. So that's kind of pretty much there. So I can now move on to the gearbox.